Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We're moving on to one of the most important topics when it comes to understanding, at a very basic level at least, the worldview of Shah Waliullah Dehlawi. And this is what's called the study of ontology. Ontology is the study of being or wujud, existence. We also have the word in Farsi, hasti. So it's the study of being. So if I give you an example, it's a study of the existence of things. So does this phone actually exist in the world out there? Does it exist in my mind? When we say the word phone, or iPhone in this case, what does that mean in reality? Or am I talking about something that exists in my mind, or is it some sort of idea? So ontology is this study. It's a very important subject in the study of metaphysics. Unfortunately, in many of our systems now, we don't study these subjects anymore. And because of that, we are impoverished. And because of that, we begin to adopt what's called a scientific or a only scientific or uniquely scientific worldview. In other words, we say, oh, we only believe in things if we can see them or observe them, or something like this. So metaphysics talks about something greater than that. And so it's a study or a branch of metaphysics. So ontology or wujud or being is a subject that falls in within the subject of metaphysics, ilahiyat. And here, when we talk about ontology or being or wujud or hasti, we're talking about questions to do with existence itself. So the very fundamental questions we're going back to: what really exists out there? Do we really even exist? Are we a bunch of atoms just randomly bouncing about in space? What are we? What is existence? And of course, this predates Muslims. So it predates Islam. And this has been a fundamental question throughout human history, this question of existence. And the ulama, the Muslim scholars, from the very beginning really displayed a very keen interest in this subject, in this existence or existential question, if you like. And you'll see very, very clearly that 3 or even 4 schools of thought emerge on this very topic. So just like in fiqh, in the Sunni tradition, we have now the 4 madhahib, for example, or in the theological schools in Sunni tradition, we have the Ash'ari, Maturidi, and the Athari schools, for example. And of course, we have many more in our Sufi tradition. In our philosophical tradition, when it comes to the question of ontology and metaphysics, you'll find similarly that there are a number of schools. There's 3 schools primarily. One's called the purely philosophical ontology of Muslim peripatetics, which is something that I'm going to talk about in a few seconds. The second one is the Ishraqi school, or what's known as the Illuminationist ontology. And then you have the third one, which is the emanationist ontologies of the Sufis. So you have the philosophers, if you like. You have the Illuminationist ontology of the Ishraqi scholars. And then you have the third one, which is the ontology of the Sufis. These are the 3 key ones that appear here. But you also have the 4th one, which is that of the theologians, the mutakallimun. So let's talk about the first one today. They are the philosophical school, the Muslim philosophers. And the most famous names you will be familiar with are Ibn al-Kindi, or al-Kindi rather, Ibn Sina, Al-Farabi, Ibn Rushd, among others. And to a fair degree, they were influenced by people like Aristotle, the famous Aristotle. Though it's fair to say that they developed their own system based on what they've read from philosophers that came before them, so before Islam, if you like. And for them, what's really, really important is that they gave primacy to existence. For them, existence is where the conversation really starts from. So they hold that it is existence itself which necessitates the reality of the thing in the external world. So existence makes that thing, it necessitates that thing coming into existence in the external world, in our world, and it provides the ground for knowledge. So when we want to know about something, we really need to know what is its ontological status. When we want to learn about knowledge, we need to go back to the basics, which is this idea of existence. For them, existence is really, really important. And then you have something else which is tied to existence, which is this idea of essence, the zatiyya, or the mahiyya, or the huwa. And the essence of a thing for them was, it's not real for them, it's just an abstraction. It's nothing other than an abstract form of the reality. So you have what's called existence, and that's the thing existing in front of you, like my hand, as you can see. And then you have the essence of my hand. And for them, the essence of what a hand is something that's abstract, it's something that's out there. But really for them, it's the existence, because when you think about the question of essences, it's something that's mentally known. It's an abstraction that your mind thinks about. Like, what is the essence of a hand? What is the essence of a human being? This is like an abstraction. It's not something that exists, right? So when you say, what is the existence of Muhammad, right? What is the essence of him? You're kind of like thinking about, well, he might be rational, he's a thinking person, but these are all abstracted forms. What really is important for them is the existence of Muhammad, if you like to take that as an example. So for them, essences, not existence, but essences are mental entities or forms, and they don't really provide the ontological reality of existence of a thing in the external world. So, just to reiterate, the form for them is the existence. It exists in the real world. It has an essence, but that's an abstract form. What's really important is the fact that the existence of it is really, really important. So for the philosophical tradition, that was really important. So they maintain that existence has the essence. It's a real thing, if you like. It's a thing that we're really concerned with, but it does have corresponding realities in the world. So it manifests in the world. So this is very, very important. And for them, essences, which is something that they're not really too focused on as opposed to existence, they're like qualities of the very core basis of the distinction between different things. So when we kind of think about essences, we're thinking about what makes things different. But what really matters to them is the existence of things. The existence is the essential thing for them, if you like. Then you have the second school, which is the Illuminationist School or the Ishraqi School. And that's obviously very famous and well known by the famous Sheikh Shahabuddin Suhrawardi, the Maqtul, rahimahullah ta'ala. And Suhrawardi, rahimahullah ta'ala, was someone who was, if you like, he was in contradistinction, contrary to the Muslim philosophers, he considered essence to be important. So whereas the philosophers thought about existence as important, for him, essence was really important. Existence was secondary. So he turns it around and he says essence is the real thing and existence is actually secondary. So for him, existence is of a secondary level in comparison to the essence of a thing. And some people would agree with that. We have the essence of a thing and the existence comes off it. So the phone has an essence. There's an essential attribute to it, and then existence, it exists afterwards. It follows from it, secondary to it. And so for him, existence is something that's additional to the essence of a particular thing. And he took this doctrine from the Quran. So the ulama, of course, all of them take this from the Quran. They're not taking this from their own back pockets, but actually from a reflection in the Quran. So they take it based on this idea of light, which is taken from the Nur verses, the ayatul Nur in the Quran. Allahu Nuru Samawati wal Ard. So according to Suhrawardi, the second school, all beings, everything, are nothing really but illuminations of the supreme light, the light of lights, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we are a manifestation of the divine light. And the supreme light, of course, is the essence of God, which is veiled by numerous secondary lights. Right? So there's an essence, and then there's the existence that come, which are a product of the essence, the essential light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is like a hierarchical nature. So there's different layers to it, and there are different grades of lighting. Just as we can think of different types of lighting and some are stronger than others, like this, in existence at the secondary level for them, there are different levels. And this corresponds to different levels of wujud and existence. The stronger the light, the closer it is, the further away, and the darker it is, if you like, or the less light there is. And so there are different levels of light and there are different levels of existence, if you like, corresponding to, in relation to the essence. And so the necessary being, which is the wajibul wujud, is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And of course, Allah here is pure light, which is self-subsisting. In other words, it doesn't need light itself. It doesn't need light from anywhere else. Whereas we as secondary existence, we need light from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And of course, Allah is self-subsistent. He is eternal. And He is the source of all secondary lights or contingent beings. Because our wujud, our existence requires Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, wajibul wujud. So without Allah's light, we wouldn't be illuminated, right? Just like, this phone here that has no light of its own, if you like, the way it's positioned here, but it gets light from another source. So that's really the essence. That's really the essence. And this is the existence because it gets its light from the essence. So this is wujud as a result of the essence, the light of all lights. So Allah is the wajibul wujud, or the necessary being, and it provides light to everything else. Everything gets its existence from the necessary light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The third one, and the one that I want to briefly touch upon here, is the mystical ontology of the Sufis. One must admit that if you read Greek philosophy and Greek thinkers, there's a Neo-Platonist element here, and it's quite obvious. And what Ibn Arabi, Shaykh al-Akbar, rahimahullah ta'ala, did was, he did introduce a new system of transcendental ontology in Islam. So there is part of it which is beyond all of us. And for the expression of his ontological ideas, he uses a term called divine essence. This is something that you find from him. The Arabic is Azat al-Muqaddas, the divine essence. Or he uses another phrase called divine names and attributes, al-asma wa-sifat wal-ilahiyya. And he also uses another phrase called theophany or theophany, which is tajalliyat, tajalli, or manifestations or mazahir. In his system, in Ibn Arabi's system, the divine essence, the core, which is the Azat al-Muqaddas, is not one individual of the order, rather it transcends the hierarchy of being. So there's these levels of being, but the Zat al-Muqaddas is not part of that. It's above all of that. And it's the first determination. It's the one from which everything comes out from, but it's out of the system. So it's not part of the system, but it's outside of the system, but it's from which everything gets its existence. And this is called, the first determination is called at-ta'ayyun al-awwal, the first determination. And this can also be called an emanationist idea, because everything emanates from there, but it's outside of the system. It's not within that system. It's not part of the hierarchy. Everything else, contingent beings, me, you, my phone, this camera, everything else, we are called contingent being. Contingent being means that our existence is predicated. It requires the existence of something else beforehand. Otherwise, we wouldn't exist. And all of these are nothing but the tajalliyat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The posh word we use is theophany, or what we call fuyuzat, the fuyuz, the emanations of the divine essence, or of the divine names and attributes. So we are tajalliyats, we are emanations from this Zatul Muqaddas, which is outside the system. It's not part of the system, and we emerge out of this. We are emanated from this. And there are other things that we will talk about later, the controversial discussion around wahdatul wujud, the unity of being, and wahdatul shuhud, the unity of consciousness. We'll talk about this later. Now, so I've introduced very briefly, and you should watch this video a few times if it doesn't make sense. And it's important for all of you to actually be aware of all of this, to spend some time understanding these different positions. Now, I mentioned that there was a fourth group, which is the mutakallimun, the Muslim scholars or scholastics or theologians. Now, the early mutakallimun, so again, if you think about history, they resented any kind of ontological discussion. And so what I've just talked about, if you met them early on Islam, they wouldn't be keen on these sort of conversations in a philosophical sense. They were like, this is something that we don't need to get into. So if you read the early books of Kalam, this is why you shouldn't just read books, but you should also know what time period that book and that scholar was in. So the early scholars, the masters of this field, such as Imam Ash'ari, Imam Maturidi, Imam Tahawi, and the scholars that followed them immediately, in their books you don't find these sort of discussions because they didn't entertain these discussions in their period, in their time. But later on, what happened was we see that Kalam, their field, and speculative philosophy, what I've been talking about, and the ontological discussions I've been talking about, they actually start to find their way into theological writings. There seems to be a coming together. There seems to be a synthesis of these ideas. So you'll find this, for example, Imam Fakhruddin Razi in his Mabahis al-Mashriqiyya, Imam Sa'duddin Taftazani in his Sharh al-Aqaid, for example, Imam As-Sayyid al-Sharif al-Jurjani in his very famous Sharh al-Mawaqif. They all have these discussions, right? So they colored their theological ideas with these ontological discussions. You'll see this language coming through, but the early scholars don't talk about this. And there's a whole discussion to be had around why this happened and who was responsible for it, which isn't too important right now. Now I want to conclude with something very, very important. Whether you take the philosophical, the Illuminationist, or the emanationist ontology, later scholars built on their works and they elaborated on them. It's a well-known fact in intellectual history that people don't just copy works, they build on scholars before them. We're not supposed to copy and paste from people before, we build on their works. So for example, during the Safavid period, you have Sadruddin Shirazi, who's most famously known with the title Mullah Sadra. He actually synthesized various versions of ontology into a single system, which you can find elaborated in his writings. And what he did was he varied all these systems, he developed these ontological systems, and it reached places like Hindustan or India. They reach ulama there in India, so it traveled across and found its way into India. And of course, Shah Waliullah was an heir. He inherited this legacy from his father, Shah Abdul Rahim, who was very, very important. In fact, Shah Waliullah himself says that he studied these works. So for example, we know that he studied the Sharh al-Hidayah al-Hikmah of Mullah Sadra. He actually studied it himself. He studied other books like the Sharh al-Lam'at, Lawamih, Rubaiyat, Naqd al-Nusus of Maulana Abdul Rahman Jami, the Sharh al-Mawaqif, which is obviously of Sayyid al-Sharif al-Jurjani, and of course the famous Aqaid of text of Allama Taftazani. He studied all of them under his father. So Shah Waliullah was reading, drinking from these intellectual thinkers, these great thinkers. He also studied famous works of Sheikh Shihabuddin Suhrawardi, the Illuminationist ideas, by reading his Awarif al-Ma'arif, for example. And he also read texts of the Naqshbandiya order. So you can see he's reading theological texts, philosophical texts, Sufi texts. All of these things Shah Waliullah is reading by virtue of his father. And of course, he read Ibn Arabi. As we know, he read the great translator and commentator of Ibn Arabi, Sadruddin Qunawi. He read Ibn Sina and other Muslim thinkers. I mean, who does this today? How many scholars do you know today who read these thinkers today, right? Who are well versed in Ibn Sina, Ibn Arabi, Mullah Sadra, Mullah Jami? Like, how many ulama do you know who actually read their works? And so Shah Waliullah had a good grasp of these sciences. How do we know this? Well, if you pick up Shah Waliullah's books like his Tafhimatul Ilahiyya, his Lamhat, his Sat'at, Al-Khairul Kathir, Al-Taf al-Quds, you'll see that he has thoroughly read all of these people that have come before him. And it's really interesting because when I give these books to students today, they can't make heads and tails of it. They don't understand what he's talking about. It's very difficult for them because most people have given up reading these very fundamental, important theological, philosophical texts. Shah Waliullah was a polymath and he read from his father. So his philosophy is a very rich philosophy. His outlook was very varied. And what he did was he combined two sources of reliable knowledge. One is divine revelation, and the second one is intellectual intuition. These are the two highest forms of knowledge. This is why he was given certainty. So my message today is, take what you want from today's video, but one thing that you should learn, you should make dua to Allah, and supplication to Allah, is that He allows us to have children and allows us to have the ability to read these people, to grasp what they're saying, because I believe many of the objections that people have, doubts that people have, confusion that people have, including Muslims, is because they haven't read these great thinkers who allow you to think really deeply and meaningfully with these things. And it gives you the answers to some of the important existential questions that we're facing. Of course, we'll talk about this in more detail. Hopefully, with our newly launched Hujjah Academy, we're going to be engaging with this a lot more. So please do go on the website. We'll provide a link for that. We're also hoping to have more scholars on our channel, inshallah ta'ala, where we'll talk about these conversations. Inshallah, there is a plan, I believe, in the pipeline to launch a simple course on logic, just to give you a basic grasp of these ideas and other ideas, inshallah ta'ala. So please do share this content. Let me know what you think. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.